Okay, everyone, I think we'll go ahead and get started, and people will join maybe in the next few minutes. So, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our second edition of our Innovator Spotlight series, this time featuring Argentine entrepreneur Exequiel Bunge, co-founder and CEO of growPack. My name is Luisa Horwitz. I'm a Public Programs Associate at America's Society Council of the Americas and a member of the YPA Internal Committee in New York. For those of you joining us for the first time, YPA is the Young Leaders Initiative of the Council of the Americas. We are a network of young professionals from across industries and backgrounds united by a common interest in Latin American government, policy, culture, business, and investment. This event is for YPA, ASCOA members, and special guests. If you would like access to our private events and all of the great YPA benefits, visit as-coa.org/YPA to learn about membership. So before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, our YPA global sponsors, BMW Group and BlackRock. And I'd like to give a special welcome to any of our YPA steering committee members who join us from our chapters in Miami, DC, and New York. So for a little preview of our program, I will be in conversation with Exequiel, and then at the end, there's time for questions. So please message your questions to the YPA events chat, and then we'll try to get them all at the end. Lastly, I'd like to ask everyone to please stay muted unless you're asking your question, and a reminder that everyone that this program is being recorded. So first of all, Exequiel, thank you so much for being here. Where are you joining us from today?
Hi, Luisa. Thanks for the invite. I'm joining from Vinhedo, which is in Brazil, 1 hour away from Sao Paulo. I'm actually in our headquarters here in our new pilot plant. Well, glad to be here and super grateful for the space and everything.
Okay. Well, we're at very different ends of the planet right now. I'm based in New York, and so it's great to hear that you're connecting all the way from South America. So Ezequiel, let's jump right into it. First, I want our members here connected to hear about growPack. So tell us about your product, about your project. I think you have a presentation that you'll share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a short presentation. It's more, I wanted to be a little bit more than just about growPack because the last talks we had, and I think it's growPack just fits into a global necessity and a global urgency, and so I'll just made a short presentation, I'll tell about a bit about growPack, but then I'll just try to make it as fluent as possible. Let's just have a conversation. I think that'll engage a lot better. And of course, anybody in here, thanks for joining, and feel free to make any questions you have or message Luisa, and let's have just a conversation. So to tell you a bit about growPack first, and then just jump into the presentation. What we do is we create biomaterials out of agricultural refuse, basically, and that's our platform for developing really functional, really efficient biomaterials, which firstly we're applying into packaging solutions, which are compostable, which are biodegradable, of course, and they engage in the whole ecosystem in a very, we think, in integrative and holistic way, and this way we basically engage into corporate customers who are looking for new material solutions that basically not only reduce plastic use, but also reduce emissions, reduce water usage, and a lot of the inherent external negativities that current way of doing things has brought. So that's a bit about growPack, and you'll hear more in the presentation with your questions. So if you want, I'll just jump into the presentation. Okay, super tasty new plastic-based hamburger here. Guess all of us here tried it. basically because we are ingesting 5 grams of microplastics per week. That's the equivalent of a credit card worth of microplastics going into our body every single week. So obviously that has a lot of consequences, not yet perceived, maybe not yet measured, but definitely there are consequences on ingesting that amount of human-based polymers, which we already know at least the non-biodegradability of them. So that made us wonder, right? What is that brought us to this reality, right? Is it that famous linear economy that we always hear about? That's the problem, right? It's basically you have all these industries, you have all these necessities, and we're getting plastic as the demon, but it's not really the material itself, it's the consequence that we're seeing, right? It's the consequence of plastic not being integrated to the environment that we are perceiving as the great issue here, but it goes a lot more deep than that, basically. So is it really the linear economy the problem? Or are we just really inefficient on the sourcing of the materials, the transforming, the converting of those materials, the use of those materials, and what we end up seeing, right, that is the discard or the non-reuse of those materials the problem? Or so we just growPack started by wondering, by really asking all these questions and basically wondering, why is it that bio-based materials aren't flooding the world instead of plastic? With that basic question, we started. And our perception was that the linear economy was like a train, right? We were trying to stop a train with our own hands. We're feeling just like that sometimes, just trying to be the railways, when what's at stake is really the planet itself, right? And humans will let's hope be here for a long time, but the planet will stay here for long. What we are trying to do is just extend our stay here as much as we can. And with all these questions, with all these let's say inquietudes, or I think it's spy English here, but with all this really curiosity, we started growPack 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. And what we do is, as I said, first, we create biomaterials that connect plants and people. For us, lignin and cellulose, which are the two main components in plants, are basically the platform that basically plants already build the world. So why wouldn't you build our materials and our necessities around those two single components that can be mixed and given a lot of other properties in order to biomaterials in this case, and then expand a lot further into our necessities, right? And so basically, we really believe that nature holds this wisdom, that nature has solved all of our material necessities, or all of its material necessities beforehand. And what we're trying to do is just replicate these barrier qualities, these natural packaging qualities that nature holds in the most efficient way possible, and then integrate them into these linear supply chains which have really grown out of proportions in a very inefficient way. And to do this, our whole cycle is based in two big cycles, which are the principles of the circular economy, which is the leveraging the biological cycle into technical cycles. And this way, our raw materials are always agricultural refuse. Nowadays we're using corn husk because there's a great opportunity of revalorizing that kind of refuse here in the region. And with it, what we're basically generating is a mechanical, non-chemical way of treating it. So what we've developed in the last couple of years is a way of not breaking those bonds in a chemical way through a purely mechanical process. And what that brings on top of a lot of efficiency in the process is basically competitive costs, which is, of course, the big barrier we identified, one of the big barriers we identified a couple of years ago when we started with Sean, my partner. It was like, yeah, basically the question is, the first answer to a question about why aren't biomaterials flooding the world is price. Of course, everybody thinks sustainability is expensive. Well, it isn't. It's expensive for the world. It's expensive for a lot for us even that we're eating those 5 grams of plastic, and it's definitely nowadays perceived as expensive for companies which are not applying it. So that was our first barrier. And our current biomaterial is very similar to cardboard. I have a product over here. We're launching this product with AV InBev, which is Ambev here in Brazil. It's just a 6-pack holder made of our material, but possibilities are endless. And new sources of biomass, even our own clients' surplus materials, and of course improving on the qualities and functionalities of the material, of the current solution and current material. Talking about consequences of really going into trying to understand these supply chains, for example, compared to cardboard with a very comparable functionality and performance, we're saving on water, we're saving on emissions, and we're saving on energy. And our goal, of course, is just to not compensate our emissions, just to have an inherent carbon neutral value chain, which is absolutely absolutely achievable or achievable if you really think on advance before growing that supply chain, right? So speaking about the opportunity just with corn husk is responsible. The alternative use is burning. If you think about it, for the producer, the value is the seed, but then the whole plant, which basically you throw resources into it. We throw water, you throw fertilizers, a lot of work into it. Almost 50% or 60% of that biomass that producers generate, they just throw away. They just burn it or stays in field. Some of it has to stay as vegetable coverage, but a lot of it is a great opportunity to just recapture it and generate this kind of solutions. So basically, if we would capture all the opportunity that we have here, we'll be talking about every year generating 76 billion of takeaway boxes instead of basically those being plastic. I mean, the solution is out there in the fields. It's just connecting these farm to market solutions that we like to call. And so you can get to the next slide, this request. And the markets are, of course, all of your corporate partners know it. All of the companies know it. The markets that we can apply new material solutions are endless. Because the necessity is global, as we saw first, we're ingesting plastic. Okay, we must, at least for the short uses, not use it. And for the uses that is really, really efficient and good, durable uses, use it and recycle it, of course. To talk about our current state, we're currently throwing out of the lab the process, and we're going into initial pilot scale here in Viñedo. We're planning on launching this product you just saw, and we're currently aligning other early adopters to test our takeaway boxes, which are 2 different verticals of basically our material applied to. For us, it's just 2 initial uses that we can scale very quick here in Brazil, and then take that into a bigger commercial scale after that initial pilot, in commercial pilot functioning, which basically leaves us in a turnkey solution state where we can replicate and decentralize the solution in other places. And our team, I just realized I didn't talk about a lot about my experience now, but I think we'll go into that on the questions.
We'll definitely go into that after this.
So we're two co-founders. We're lifelong friends. Sean and I have been friends for more than 10 years now. It's not our first business together. Our first business was actually music because I studied a couple of years of engineering and then I went to cinematographic music. I am a DJ. I worked as a DJ. I not currently work as a DJ, but I taught music. I composed, and on the middle of that transition, Sean brought the idea, and we started about 4 years ago. And we clearly didn't have experience on the paper, cellulose, or anything around that technology industry, so we quickly looked for help, and that's what we knew from the beginning was that we didn't knew anything, basically. So we looked for Marcelo first. Marcelo is our lead R&D head here. He also is director of INTI, which is the National Institute for Industrial Technology back in Argentina. We did all the first part in Argentina, and at the same time, we met Samuel, which is our industrial partner here in Brazil, and everything was more logical and less risky on the technological side to be just besides our more strategic partner for the time and the phase we were facing. And also we just brought in Joao, which is our controller and finances. And the team is growing. And we have a board, which is basically really, really part of our team as well, because we work very closely with them. They have all kind of experiences. Ambev, for example, Ambev packaging director is in our board, and we are currently always thinking about new ways of applying. And also Jaime, which worked in Intel. So there's a lot of different experience and definitely a lot of knowledge being shared, and with a common vision and a common goal, which is grow, scale, and achieve those really, really efficient way of doing things, and at the same time making business, because it's a good business. And to speak about a timeline, but I will go more in depth if you want after your questions. But we started in early 2018. It was a period of trial and error, and crushing our heads into any well, we're still crushing our heads into any kind of problems, but those were other kind of problems. And today we closed our first seed round in the middle of last year, in the middle of the pandemics, which was another experience. And we're moved to Brazil. We are living here. We've been living here for 6 months now. Had to learn Portuguese from scratch, which was also very fun. We're growing our plant here. The plan is to launch in about 3 months, and those two single products, and then really grow from here and really validate and optimize processes at that scale in order to then scale towards middle of next year. So I just wanted to end the presentation with a provocation, let's say, which is once again, is the linear economy the problem? Is it, or is it shifting consumption the solution? Is it really? Because what we need, I think, for us, and what we believe as a company as well, is that consumption, production, companies, institutions, farms, production, everything, food production is all composed by people. So why we don't transform people, right? And they all do that. So it's an individual thing, and it's a absolutely global thing and necessity. And it's also an opportunity to develop what I see as necessary technologies, right? And necessary technologies, we see all kind of technologies nowadays. Now it's a time for necessary technologies. It's an opportunity. I really like this graph because we're always thinking like this with our hands, and maybe there's a lot of more implications to what we're doing as a species in order to stay here for as long as we need to. So speaking about necessary opportunities, the region is full of opportunities. It's growing exponentially. If you have an idea and if you execute it well, capital will flow. As we see here in this graph, it's just flowing into new ideas, into this kind of necessary technologies. So I think one of the objectives of the talk here was to encourage people to start these kind of solutions and to start working either from their own company or either on their own. So this is a graph that I really like to show, because capital will flow if you just execute and have a clear vision of what you want to do, especially in our field, and that is the agtech and all the improving our food systems, basically. Just growing, and it won't stop growing on the next couple of years. And just a quote from an author I really like, which is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He's there in New York, where you are, Luisa. If humans fight the last war, nature will definitely fight the next one. So open for questions.
No, Exequiel, thank you so much for presenting and putting this together for us. You have touched on so many points that I want to ask you about. This is very, very in depth. Really, thank you for this presentation. So the technical aspects of growPack and all of that, I will leave those questions to the audience, because what I want to know more and what I want us to talk about more is really your experience as an entrepreneur from start to finish. So you mentioned that you have a background in music and cinematographic music and engineering even, and so you clearly have a mixed skilled background. And essentially, my first question to you is, what was the main impetus for starting this project with your friend, longtime friend Sean, right? Like, was it really this quest to do something sustainable, or was it to start a business with a purpose? Was it more the business side, or was it more the general sustainability side? What was the biggest reason for you to start this in the first place?
I think the biggest reason was thrive and hunger. Basically, it was not definitely a purely sustainability driven desire from the start. It was more of a desire to do things. Like we both feel that there's a lot to do. If you don't know what to do nowadays, you just get into a notepad, start drafting problems, and from those problems you can get a lot of solutions. Every one of those solutions is a new business opportunity. So it was more of that from the start. We were, as I said, it was not our first business, and we were looking for things to do together. When the idea just one day Sean brought the idea, and it was just questions on why is it that this isn't happening. It sounds so logical.
Right. Yeah. And I think your story also seems to be a perfect example of having an idea, not having the expertise behind it to carry it out, and seeking out the proper guidance and advice. And so that is another question that I have for you. What was your first move once you had the idea, realized, you weren't agricultural technologists who had all the solutions in hand? Who did you go to first? What was your first move to literally build it, to start it from that first moment that you guys had that eureka?
It's been a roller coaster, really, and I actually have a couple of pictures from the whole process that I could share to really go into the moves and the story if you want. And our first move was to just trial and error. Was just we had from the start, we identified that there were two key issues for biomaterials not being really massively used, which was, as I said on the presentation, cost, of course, and the big barrier into big capital investments that required. Let's say leveraging existing infrastructure in order to scale, basically. So from the start, we started asking ourselves a lot of questions. We started asking and seeing a lot of YouTube videos on how paper was done, because we felt like, okay, that's a starting point. Paper is basically a nature-based product that it's fully biodegradable. It's very, let's say, questionable in the way of being produced, and it has improved a lot, but it's still part of the same kind of industries that grew out of proportion because of bottom line and just end necessity, and didn't account for externalities for a long time until they had to basically pay for them or adapt to them or make their technology more efficient, not only because of cost reduction, but also of environmental footprint reduction. So having realized that, we went into trying every single thing that we could try, and we defined those very two strict non-negotiables that we wanted to have, which was our input has to be a refuse, our feedstock has to be a refuse, basically, not because a circular economy. Basically, if somebody is not using it, you can create value out of it. It was a more logical approach for us. And the second non-negotiable was we can't be using chemicals on the process. If nature doesn't process things, nature does process things chemically, but it processes things on a, at least damaging way, which is, what is a damaging way? It's a subtractive way of doing things. You start with oil and you start decomposing different components of it for every single step of the supply chain to use. Very inefficient in the case of plastic, or in the case of paper, again, commodity-based industry, which is grabbing trees, and what they used to do is throw out the lignin, which is 35% of what we start off. So basically, you're assuming a loss of 35% before even starting your supply chain. And that second non-negotiable was, we have to have an additive approach to manufacturing. We have to have an additive approach to the supply chain, and not a subtractive approach in which we are just providing other inputs for other part of the supply chain to really process in an inefficient way. And in that aspect, we started working back there at first at the kitchen of our place, breaking liquefiers, breaking pressure pots, doing all kinds of things. Our moms weren't very happy at all, and we finally got a lab in Inti, and we started doing tests over there. Again, all kind of plants, all kind of tests, and those two non-negotiables always in mind. The first thing we do is, of course, treat it chemically, see what we can get of it, and then we started getting a lot of know-how and knowledge. And we never expected as founders to know everything. We just, again, knew that there was a lot more than we didn't know. But out there's a lot of people that are very, very, very knowledgeable about the specific fields they're in. So our work was basically connecting the dots, and it'll always be our job here is just thriving for connecting those dots and executing. Basically, it's not our job knowing absolutely the science of everything. We have to understand it, but we don't have to be nuclear scientists to do it.
Right. No, it seems like a lesson here from what you're saying is that it's helpful and important to have these kind of parameters that you're constantly trying to stick within, or kind of a North Star or two in your case to always abide by. So that's interesting. And then I think something that, hopeful entrepreneurs want to know about as well, and I hope you can expand a bit from your experience here on this, is what is it like to pitch your idea to investors? Because this is obviously a huge part of the whole process, is getting people to agree to support you monetarily and finance your project. So tell us a bit about your experiences, your and your co-founder Sean's experiences pitching to investors. And alongside this, what trends have you noticed in the sustainability space in Latin America?
Yeah, okay.
You have to made you think a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to structure the answer. So pitching, as generally said, not only to investors, I think you're always pitching. Life is a constant pitch. We just don't realize. And for me, the start to pitch was sort of easy at first because, as I mentioned before, I was a DJ. I was used to being on stage and trying to tell people a story. Because teaching is basically that. You're trying to tell people and share your vision of things, or your vision for music in this case, but in this other case, your vision for a better world, let's say, or for a necessary technology that you believe in. So that aspect was easy. All the other aspects were super hard. trying to find trying to find the root of the problem, I think, is the first thing you have to do. This root problem is what I was saying before. Is the linear economy the problem? Is the plastic the problem? Or is it? Or is it? And trying to go further into or is it? Or is it? Or is it? Until you find what you believe is the real root of the problem you're trying to solve. And then I believe, and going to the second part of the question, I believe that investors should only be investors if they first share your vision, of course, and today, more even, world hasn't been so liquid. There hasn't been so many cash growing and lying around. Entire countries are just throwing out cash like that. It's not about cash itself. It's about really having a clear and identified problem and a solution for it that will bring investors. So basically, we found out that if we focused on really validating every single step that we believe that we had to validate and building upon that and really conceiving our whole value chain first and our whole field of action, let's say from farm to market, exactly. And if we started procuring people slowly and building relationships with each one of those verticals, for us, it was from field to technology to industry to commercial side. And we really did that map into a board, and we said, okay, here, who's our target? Here's who's our target. And we started targeting basically people. And I feel super, super glad and grateful that every people that we've targeted, we've managed to get on board, which is really a transformative experience for us because nobody's born knowing how to do it. You just go out, do it, and then learn. So it's been a roller coaster, and I'm sure it'll continue to be a roller coaster. And definitely those investors that you start bringing in are, as I said in the presentation, start really going, like, start being the core of what you do, because they were the first that believed in you, really. So we feel super, super grateful for all that we achieved in that side. And the only suggestion to that is, once again, defining the problem, really working on the solution, and mapping out those investors and just practicing on the pitch. That's practice, shower practice, field practice, or whatever you end up speaking alone, maybe a lot of times, but that's the easy part.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's definitely about practice, like you say. I mean, for everything, like practicing to speak publicly or any kind of presentation, right? Because pitching in itself is a presentation of a concept and trying to convince someone of your idea. So, so it seems that you've been successful so far, and it's where I'm sure you have lots of plans to pitch to many other people. Um, so what about working as a team? I'm curious to know about your relationship with your co-founder. You said you guys are very close friends. You've known each other for a while. You've done business before together. In the case of this business, growPack, how do you and Sean, how do you work together and how do you complement each other when it comes to this particular business? And what advice would you have maybe for other co-founders um, in this sense?
Shan is the perfect partner, I think. We really complement each other because we're worlds apart, like really, really worlds apart on the way of being, on a lot of things. But our functions are super clear for us. They've been from the start, which are basically you deal from the doors to the inside, I deal from the doors to the outside. That's the way we defined it. And everything in between. And everything in between, there's a lot of things, but there's a clear line that divides that, which is the door. And in that aspect, Shan is a machine. He doesn't stop at any time. You ask him, hey, we should get this, and he already sent 10 emails asking for it. Maybe it's not written very uh, correctly or with all the grammatical things. It used to annoy me that those are the things that really, really built. I think we built not only a friendship, but also a very healthy professional relationship. Um, of course, it has its very tough moments. We've just been living 6 months together. So imagine not only friends, partners, but co-living together.
Yeah.
That ended, but for the sake of both mental health, but of course, it's all about, I think, going back to the presentation, it's all about people, it's all about communicating the best way you can. So we had to learn on communicating our needs and communicate our sensations and our views. And if we didn't share the views, we go into the room and we discuss them until we have a common view in order to take it to the outside. So going back to your question, I think a suggestion is get a partner like Sean.
Well, what a shame that we don't have Sean here today. Maybe next time you can both
Yeah,
be here speaking together. But no, that's great. That's fantastic. Seems like you're a prime example of a co-founding team, no? And it's amazing that you both had to learn Portuguese from scratch as well by moving to Brazil. I mean, I'm sure that was an additional challenge for you. I mean, you're a Spanish speaker, so probably was not that hard for you. But that's
depending
another
on what kind of Portuguese.
true. That's very true.
You
So
also know that.
yes. Um, so I have another more sort of metaphysical question here for you. If you could go back in time and do something different since you started this project, what would that be? If you have anything in mind that you can share with us.
I wouldn't trust FedEx.
Okay.
No, no, just kidding. Um,
I'm sure you've made many people laugh with that. It's a big, big problem here.
no, we lost a really important shipping for us. Uh, that was like our first prototypes that were coming back from China. We lost them and we worked so hard for them. And they just got lost in the way. It was
Mm.
one of our biggest frustrations over there. Um, so I think I don't like thinking about going back in time, but what I realized is that all the times that we didn't moved for our gut feeling and we moved for our rationality, we most probably failed. And that includes that shipment. And that includes a lot of decisions that we made, like really rationalizing. I'm not speaking about moving without thinking. I'm speaking about moving with your gut feeling and developing that gut feeling further. Of course, brainstorming, planning around that. But if your gut feeling was that, that's because that's why it's called gut feeling. You really feel it like that. So that's our I think are one of my main one of the main things that I've learned in the last couple of years, like really trusting your instinct and really being confident that is really aligned. And if anything speaks elsewhere, it's your ego telling you that you can't do that, or it's your insecurities telling you that maybe that can be done. But definitely everything can be done if you have, again, a really well stated problem, a really worked on solution, and a very good team, and start building around it.
Yeah, certainly. Things that I always hear as well is the importance of building a good team, but I'm sure that's so much harder said than done.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in your presentation how you said the possibilities are endless, right? With these kinds of projects, like using regenerative technologies for building all kinds of solutions. But before I open it up to questions, I wanted to ask you where where do you see growPack in the near future? Where do you want it to be? And also in the far future, right? What's your vision for this project?
In the near future, I see growPack as growing to a huge scale, first here in Brazil, and after that, growPack is for us a platform. It's just as I said, lignin and cellulose are the initial platforms for a lot more of value generated on those fields. So I see growPack as a part of a global trend that's definitely growing exponentially, which is basically integrating all of our activities into the ecosystem in a more efficient way. And in that aspect, I think market is growing a lot. It's all about execution and taking that market more than out gaining competition or anything. It's more about focusing and really efficient solutions on this kind. And again, possibilities are endless, not about only materials, of making better food, of making better technologies, going back to the presentation, right?
Yeah, certainly. So, Ezequiel, I have here one question for you from Alan. He asks, today you're using corn stalk for your product. What other crops might you be considering?
And the region is full of opportunities on that aspect. We believe that basically agriculture holds one of the keys to solving our most urgent needs, and in that aspect we are testing all kind of things, because basically the region has all kind of biomass surplus lying around that side, from rice stocks to hemp, which is a really appealing opportunity, to wheat, to barley, to even after that going into even peanut, cáscara,
The peel.
ahí está, the peel.
Thanks.
So we don't like to be still for a lot of time. So we think here on our pilot plant, we're building exactly our our own lab, and this will stay here for testing purposes on a second phase, and testing basically everything that we can get our hands in, and the region is super rich in those kind of resources. So again, possibilities are endless.
And as as you guys have grown and you've put your project out there, I'm wondering if you have examples, of people that you've met that are doing other kinds of sustainability-based projects like this around across the region. And what I want is to regionalize this conversation a little bit, right? What do you notice from this movement of using regenerative technologies across the region? Is there a particular country, for example, that you notice is doing this more than others? I'm an open-ended question.
Yeah, I think once again, going to the region, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, even the States have a key role on food systems production, on food systems itself. Food systems go from field to market. So possibilities on developing better solutions for all that space, I see growing. My graph on the presentation showed it. And on that space, I see a lot of innovation coming through on the next 10 years. It's amazing the kind of things that you bump in when you start getting into this world. People are doing amazing things. There's bioplastic coming out of thin air. So basically, yeah, possibilities are endless on the space.
Certainly. We have another question from Francisco from Miami. Francisco, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Exequiel, what a phenomenal presentation, and congratulations. We're truly very inspired. I speak on behalf of YPA in Miami. I'm Francisco Martinez. I wanted to ask you, so being from Colombia, I know Colombia is it's an agricultural country by nature. One of the key products being coffee, of course. I like you. I'm not sure how you say costales in in English, but it's basically the bags in which the coffee is stored. I know that that they come from similar products, and I was wondering if into the future you're thinking of venturing into these kinds of um, of products for the coffee growers of Colombia, and maybe even other kinds of agricultural ventures. Bananas, for example, they use a lot of cardboard and of course plastic as well. I don't know if that's even within the realm of what you're thinking, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Hi, Francisco. Thanks for listening and holding there and thinking interesting. And thanks for the question. And yeah, banana fibers are super good, actually. Super good fibers and strong fibers. And on that aspect, never thought about getting into specifically coffee packaging, mainly because of focus right now, mainly because we're thermoforming our material, and that has its own kind of limitations, but also makes us focus on the solutions that we're developing. So why not on a second phase?
I'm sure it would gather a lot of interest, and especially Colombia. It's a country that's been welcoming all sorts of green initiatives and sustainable initiatives like yours. So, te auguro un buen futuro ahí.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Francisco, for your question. And I'm going to address one question here from the chat from Jana from EY. I asked you where you saw growPack in the near future, in the far future, but Jana asks, where do you see growPack in the next 5 years or 10 years?
5 years, definitely, as I said, like growing into a really big scale, because basically all of our corporate partners have that kind of timeline with their own environmental objectives, and a lot of them, most of them, have no clue on how getting there. and they're just crying for help on these kind of solutions to scale. So we want to be there, supplying all of these material bio-based solutions from here to 5 years. And in 10 years, Sean and I talk about a lot of space things, not very concrete things, but we definitely go on growing that vision into making things more efficient and making things basically integrated to our ecosystems, and developing on those needs will definitely take us to a couple of interesting places, hopefully sometime on making material spaces, but that's definitely for another type of conversation.
No, yeah, definitely. So I have another question here from Ariana, who's also from Miami, and she says, what advice do you have for other young professionals who are looking into launching a business? So kind of like that initial pre-launch advice.
Stop thinking and do it.
Right.
And yeah, and going into trying to define the root of that problem and working and focusing on the solution that would solve that problem, and building the team around who can build that solution.
No, yeah. I mean,
I
that's
think
a,
I think I became super redundant and insistent.
really, I'm sure that's not true. And maybe what's your advice, given your experience from being someone, I mean, from being Argentine and launching something in a different country? What's your take on that, on moving countries and trying to navigate a new system of regulations as well?
Wow. My take is just wow. There's so much things. Probably the biggest challenge on every single aspect, not only professional, that I could ever imagine and happy on taking. Definitely a big challenge. But upside is huge. So glad of taking it. But yeah, regulatory and all the things in between is super complex here, and I think it's one of the Latin America's biggest challenge, right? Overcoming all of these barriers. Sadly, an entry barrier for new businesses and people trying to do things. But it's definitely, again, a region full of resources and opportunities, and you just saw the graphs how everything is growing, especially in Latin America, because it's full of problems. So consequently, it's full of potential solutions.
Yeah, wow. I mean, unless you have, I'm sure eventually growPack will have a government affairs advisor who can help you navigate all those regulatory issues, I'm sure. So there's another question here in the chat from Maria from JP Morgan. She asks how are you thinking about hiring talent? And you did mention this earlier, you are growing as a team, but are you expanding the team right now?
How are we thinking and how are we doing is we want to have in every single field that we're aiming for just the best that we can get for, and with, of course, a shared vision. So those are the two main things that we are looking for. And right now we're not looking to grow the team as for now. We're trying to focus on the production side of things. So we'll be doing more of operative hirings, and we'll be growing the team on that side. But definitely we want to have a absolutely multi-talented and, of course, the best on what they do team. I think everybody wants to. And we are super open on that. I mean, we brought our Joao, which is our first really full-time hire here, and we just brought him in December. And it's been a super constructive experience for us as well, like learning to interview from scratch and really identifying on what we're looking for. And what we realized, again, we follow our gut feeling. Of course, it then through all kinds of filters and through all kinds of rationalization, but our gut feeling was right, or at least it really feels right, and it always felt right. So I think going back to the gut feeling thing, it's more about that.
No, yeah, more and more what we hear from all these startups in Latam that are growing like crazy is about that fit, right? They're looking for people that fit culturally and share the vision. And of course, expertise is welcome, but it's important to really share that vision and be a fit into the company, right? But
Yeah, exactly.
looking at the time, I'm afraid we do not have more time for questions. Thank you everybody who sent one in. But Exequiel, thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to say that this concludes our Innovator Spotlight. And just a massive thank you to Exequiel, our sponsors, BlackRock, BMW Group, and all of you for joining us. And if you'd like to learn more about YPA, please go to as.coa.org/YPA. And we will also be emailing out information after this program concludes. We do have a full year of programming planned, so we'd love for you to join us again. We have the LABA conference, which is hosted this year by Columbia Business School and NYU Stern Business School and YPA, and has a fabulous lineup of speakers, including Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, Chief of Government of the City of Buenos Aires in Argentina. And then YPA is hosting on March 16th, a Crypto 101 on NFTs for anybody trying to understand the value and social impact of NFTs. That will be led by Francisco in Miami. But all in all is to say thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Exequiel, congratulations on your work and wishing you all the best of luck. And we'll stay in touch. And thank you, everyone, and good evening.